Okay, here we go. All right. Welcome to our webinar. We are going to get started here just a minute. We're open a little bit early, but as you come in, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're at in the world and maybe a little bit about your weather. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's like 45, 48 and kind of cloudy. It's a classic November day right now. It's getting kind of just gray. November's always really gray here. How about you, Amy or Andrea?
Yes, I was just typing in the chat box. I'm in New Jersey. It's sunny and a beautiful fall day. All the leaves are gorgeous and coming down. I see Jennifer and Celestine. Tell us what organization you're with too. I would love to know what organization everybody's with. Yes, Megan from the Carmel Foundation, California.
Which is not a foundation.
Oh, but not a foundation. Excellent.
What are you? What are you, Megan? I'm Marissa from Illinois and Gary, 83 in Miami.
Miami. Let's go to Miami. That sounds way better than here.
Right. Jennifer, a family homeless shelter. Thank you. New Pathways. Great. Marcy Claire. Hi, Marcy from Calgary. Calgary is way over on the edge of the plain, the Canadian, that big plain. It's impressive. You think about that.
Right in Seattle, Jessica. Yeah. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started. As you're coming in, introduce yourself. If you're just joining us, tell us a little bit about your organization, where you're at in the world, your weather, all that good stuff. Please don't be shy. We have a fabulous community. These webinars are a lot of fun and there's a lot of engagement. So obviously our thought leaders are great resources to lean on and ask, but your peers right here in this community also ask each other questions. I see a lot of help happening every week when we do these of supporting each other with your ideas and your concepts and experiences. So please don't be shy.
I see an old friend of mine here on the
good
call.
Yeah, there's probably some.
Right. Nice to see people we know.
Names and faces. So here's what we're going to do. I want to just give you all a warm welcome. We're really excited about today's webinar, a better feasibility study, how to prepare for a successful campaign with Amy Eisenstein and Andrea Kihlstedt. So welcome. Before we do that, a few housekeeping items. Step one, we are recording. So we will send out the recording and the slides to you later today. So keep on the lookout for that. And questions. So make sure if you have a question that you want us to answer, or want Amy and Andrea to answer, please use the QA tab so we can monitor and keep track of that and check those off once we've answered the questions. But feel free to use the chat with each other and the dialogue. Lots of great engagement from that perspective. So a few little housekeeping items. My name is Ann Philman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Bloomerang. And I just want to give a 2-second shout out to Bloomerang and what we're all about. Bloomerang is about making fundraising easier. We're here to help you foster authentic donor relationships, get those donors engaged and get them coming back and connecting with your organization. Why? So that we can help your nonprofit thrive. And so we do that through our donor management software. And I just put a little quote up here from a customer that has seen their donor retention rate rise to 70%, which is pretty impressive given that the average first-time donor retention rate in the industry is about 18.6%. So we are really excited and are always really feel honored that we have the opportunity to support so many nonprofits and help them thrive. So, but don't go check out Bloomerang right now. We do want you to focus on what we're going to talk about today, but one just little tidbit is that we have a special promotion, which is a buy now, pay later. Lots to learn about. You can learn about in the slide, but so there's an opportunity here if you're thinking about it through October 31st. So you got to act fast. So it's coming up to close out. So with that, I do want to just do some introductions. Let's get to know Amy Eisenstein, the CEO and co-founder. Amy, you've been a development professional and fundraising consultant for many years, and you're leading expert in the field. I know you've helped many small and large nonprofits alike raise millions of dollars. And through major gift, capital campaigns, board development, annual fund campaigns, direct mail, plan gifts. I mean, just an expert all around. So really exciting to have you here. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
Yes. And Andrea Kihlstedt, campaign expert and co-founder as well for Capital Campaign Toolkit. Andrea's probably written the most comprehensive book in the field on capital campaign fundraising. So we are among experts here, and a number of other books you've written around fundraising. So Andrea has a book, Capital Campaign Strategies That Work, serves as the text in advanced fundraising courses for leading nonprofit programs worldwide. And this book is out in its 4th edition. So Andrea, congratulations on that. And that's really exciting. So not only is she an expert on capital campaign fundraising, also worked for many years as a campaign consultant and a top flight coach. So really, really exciting to have you here, Andrea. Welcome. And thank you for being with us. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Amy and Andrea to walk us through today's.
Thank you so much, Anne.
All right. Thank you, Anne. Yes. So we're going to get started. And Andrea and I love to have an interactive session. So do open your Q&A box. Keep your chat box open and feel free to chat away with each other in the chat box, and also ask your questions or chat with me and Andrea in the Q&A box. We love to, engage. So anyways, we're going to be talking about a better feasibility study method. And if you want a free campaign guide and checklist, you can text the number on the screen. It'll also be on the final slide, so don't panic or take a quick screenshot, but I'm going to keep going. All right, so this is our agenda for today. We are going to be talking about what is a feasibility study, right? That's the topic of the webinar, so we can't launch in until everybody's on the same page in terms of what a feasibility study is. We're going to be talking about what the traditional model is, and of course, the new model and why we believe it's better, and what we've learned so far in terms of execution and having nonprofits use this new model. So we're going to do a quick poll, not really a poll. We didn't set it up as in a poll, but we want you to open your chat box and you're going to just put in A, B, C, or D. So where are you in your campaign? Are you just thinking about it? Oh, or E. A, just thinking about it. Let us know. Pre-campaign planning is B. Feasibility study stage is C. Soliciting gifts is D. Just want to get a sense of where everybody is. I see mostly A's and B's, some C's and D's. Anybody E's here? Excellent. So for those of you that are soliciting gifts, hopefully you are doing well and maybe thinking about your next feasibility study. All right, lots of A's and B's and some C's too. Good. All right, well, welcome. Andrea, why don't you kick us off? What is a feasibility study?
Yes, thank you, Amy. I'm really happy to be here with all of you and to talk about what a feasibility study is. It sounds like a simple question, but in reality, a feasibility study is this peculiar name that doesn't really fit what this study is. And every once in a while, someone asks us about that. You would think that from that word feasibility study, that it's a study that determines whether your campaign is feasible, right? One that would be a natural assumption given the way we talk about feasibility studies. The reality is that a feasibility study, it really would be better served if we called it a campaign planning study. It is a study done early in your campaign planning process to help you assess the possibilities of your campaign, not whether or not you should do a campaign, but whether the case is compelling and how much you might be able to raise through a campaign. So it enables you to do a better job of presenting to your board a reasonable set of campaign goals and objectives in which they will have some confidence, because it's not just someone having made up how much they can raise. It actually is based on a set of leadership interviews. The reason we usually use the phrase feasibility study is because that's what a lot of people look for. That's what people think it's called. And much as I would like to change that, it's not so simple as to wave a magic wand and have everybody talk about a campaign planning study. And when we talk about that, people kind of look at us and say, well, what do you mean by a campaign planning study? They are really one and the same. It's rare that a feasibility study really says it is not feasible. The results are always, well, something is feasible. What is it that's feasible and how do we move forward? Now, it does a variety of things. It tests a plan and a dollar goal. And let's stop for a second and think about that. Some people go into a feasibility study thinking that they should first figure out how much money the organization can raise, and then they'll figure out what to do with the money, right? That they think that it's a study that sort of in the abstract figures out how much you can raise. And I understand the desire to do that, but that's not the way these studies work. They test quite a specific plan. If your organization is going to build a new building or start a new program or a variety of things, you have to put a plan together and put a dollar goal about what that's going to cost. And then you test that with your donors. So it actually tests a specific plan. It engages your top prospects, right? Amy's going to talk a little more in a minute about who it is you're going to be talking to. But I can tell you that a chunk of the people you're going to be talking to are the people who could give the largest gifts. So it gives you an opportunity before you move into a campaign, before you're ready to ask those people for gifts, to involve them in thinking through the plan, in giving you their feedback and their advice about the plan that you're proposing. It recommends what we call a working goal. Now, what's a working goal? Well, you might substitute the word draft goal. Right? When you've put your preliminary plan together, you will have a preliminary or a draft dollar goal that you're testing. And after the interviews, you're going to look at that number and say, well, the number is too low or too high. And you're going to come up with a different goal, a working goal that you will recommend to your board. And finally, a study like this builds board confidence. Now, some of you perhaps are board members, and if you are board members facing a capital campaign, it wouldn't surprise me if you were somewhat nervous, right? Your organization may be about to embark on a project to raise more money than it has ever raised before. And if it goes south, guess whose table that's going to fall on, right? It's going to fall right on the board table. So it's not uncommon for board members to be anxious about moving into a capital campaign, and doing a feasibility study where you actually get data from the people who could give the largest gifts and pull that together into a specific set of recommendations does wonders to build the confidence of board members. Next slide, Amy.
Well, let me just add a couple of quick
sure,
points.
please.
So it always amazes me when board members are arguing against doing a feasibility study,
Right?
because that means they want to go into a campaign blind without any data or information that it can be successful. And I think it stems from what Andrea was talking about before in terms of they don't want a feasibility study that tells them they can't do a campaign. But they really misunderstand what the purpose of the feasibility study is. It's to prepare you for a successful campaign. And it does that in a number of ways, including engaging your top prospects and helping determine what is a realistic goal. So Gary's saying, I think it's a question without a solicitation ask. Yes, you are gauging what your donors might consider as a gift level, and you're not asking them for a gift at this time. So, and Gary, we will get to, there is no such thing as an in-house study unless you have someone that's extremely experienced in doing this. Engaging an outside consultant is exactly what we're going to talk about, and how to think about that, and what kind of study you want to do, and maybe even how to pick we can answer at the end how to pick a consultant or how to think about that. It's a
But
good
before
question.
we do that, let's first look at how a campaign lays out. Let's look at the phases of a campaign and let's see where the feasibility study actually fits in those phases. Amy and I sort of have this timeline for campaigns. You can see that we have 7 phases of the campaign. We begin our campaigns with what we call pre-campaign planning. Now, some people don't consider that to be part of a campaign. We distinctly do, because if you're already thinking about a campaign in this pre-campaign period, you will be engaging the people who can make your campaign successful later. It will begin to turn your attention to those people early on. So we have pre-campaign planning. The second phase is this little feasibility study or campaign planning study phase. And then you move in, believe it or not, to another planning phase, a campaign planning phase in which you will take what you've learned in the feasibility study, pull together a group of volunteers and key staff members and develop your campaign plan that factors in what you have found. Those 3 phases move you into what most of you probably already know about, which is the quiet phase of the campaign. Everybody knows you've got a quiet and a public phase of the campaign. And during the quiet phase, you're going to solicit the largest gifts to your campaign, and a significant amount of that, of your goal, 65% or more, you'll kick off the campaign. That's phase 5. You'll move into the public phase, which it might surprise you to see is fairly short, because it has to have a lot of energy throughout, and you can't sustain that for very long. And then there's a fairly lengthy post-campaign period in which you wrap everything up. It takes a fair length of time to bring in pledges, to steward your donors, to document everything that's happened. So those are the 7 phases of the campaign. The feasibility study, as you see, is right up front, right in early phases of the campaign. And it's where you test your plan with lead donors, you discuss with them the case for support, and you assess the potential giving from your largest donors. That's what leads you to be able to do an effective campaign plan. Now, you might ask, all right, who are you going to talk to? Right, yeah. You're about to get out the door. You've done your pre-campaign planning. You've done your feasibility. You're getting ready to do your feasibility study. And the question is, okay, who are you going to talk to? Who are they going to talk to, Amy?
Yes, it's an excellent question, right? So who are you going to talk to in your feasibility study? Well, in any campaign, more than 50% of the money will come from your top 20 donors. And if you've done a campaign before or been in fundraising for a while, you've probably seen or are familiar with a gift range chart or a campaign pyramid or a gift table, whatever you want to call it. But it shows specifically that the top 50% of your donations come from a small portion of your donors, and then gets broader as you go out. So really what you want to do is focus on who could these top 20 donors to your campaign be. And, you're going to talk to more people than this, of course, but that is really who you want to focus on, because I want to know who has the potential to really move the needle on my campaign and make a significant difference. So we've got a little capital campaign formula for you. But the feasibility study, in order to definitively say, this is how much we believe we can raise, you have to have talked to those 20 people who can get you to 50, 60, 70, 80% of your goal. So you're going to be looking for 20 gifts that will get you to 50, 60, 70, 80% of your goal from 50 prospects. So really, you're going to think about who are the 50 people. Now, all those 50 people aren't going to give you the top gifts, but hopefully many of them will. Some of them are likely to give you slightly smaller gifts in your gift range chart and your gift table. But those are the 50 people, 50 of the people that you're going to target to talk to. Now, ultimately, you probably won't do a study that's as big as 50 people, but hopefully you'll get to talk to 20 or 30 or 40 people. to do your interviews and your survey. So that's who you want to really, really pay attention to.
Now,
All right.
Amy, go back a slide for me,
Yep.
just for a sec.
Yes.
So I talked a little about this pre-campaign planning phase. And the reason I like that, the reason we like that, and it's because if you're thinking about these early phases, about when you are actually planning your project, when you're thinking about buying the land, you're thinking about planning the building or the new program. And if you're already thinking about your campaign, you're going to be identifying the people who could give those 20 gifts. And in some way or other, or maybe multiple ways, you can be winding them into the planning for this project. And if you do that, then when you go and interview these people in your feasibility study, it's not going to come out of the blue. You will already have wound them in some way, and your feasibility study interview will just reinforce that connection. So that's why we like this pre-campaign planning. We like to be thinking about the campaign already as you're planning the project. This is what we call pre-campaign planning process. Okay.
Really, your feasibility study, these conversations are teeing up your asks. You're not asking, but they're preparing your asks.
And your project planning is teeing up the feasibility study interviews, right? If your lens is campaign from the beginning, you will be far more successful.
There is a method to the madness. There
Yes.
is best practice strategy. There is a roadmap. We really don't want you winging it or making it up. That's when we see organizations get into trouble. So you may be at an organization right now where somebody on your leadership team, whether it's your executive director or a loud board member, is saying, let's go right into campaign. I'm ready to ask for gifts. Let's skip a feasibility study. And I want to tell you why that is a bad idea. And give you some ammunition to talk to those people who are whispering in people's ears that let's just go, let's skip this crucial element of planning. So the reason, there are so many reasons we're going to go through why feasibility studies are important, but they require you to have a clear plan. Andrea alluded to this earlier, but if you go to donors and you say, how much money do you think we can raise? What do you think we should do? There's nothing for them to comment on. It's too abstract. They don't have any idea how much you could raise if you're not presenting them with a clear plan. And you're not going to go to donors with a jumble of ideas. So it requires you to think about what is our plan. We've talked about it engages prospective donors, the biggest potential donors to your campaign. It lets them in early. We always in major gift fundraising, we talk about getting feedback, asking for advice from donors. This is the ultimate opportunity to ask your key donors for real advice on something concrete. How do they feel about your campaign plans and different aspects of the plans? It forces you to focus on the top donors. So sometimes an organization will say, we don't know who's going to give these big gifts. We don't know the people in the community. Maybe we should just do a blast mailing to everybody. No, this process forces you to identify who are the 20 to 50 people that we should really be focusing on for this campaign, because that will help your campaign be successful. This is not about a mass mailing. This is not bulk mail. It clarifies your strengths and weaknesses as an organization and gives you an opportunity to do something about it before you actually go into asking. We've covered, it gives the board confidence. I mean, if 20 of your biggest potential donors say they're on board literally and figuratively and indicate that they will participate, as a board member, I really want that. I want to know that the biggest donors in the community are, most of them have raised their hand and said, yes, we agree with this plan, go ahead. It provides outside perspective, right? When you're making your own plans as staff and the leadership team, sometimes when you're in the eye of the storm, you don't see what some of the other issues are. And by talking to 20 or 30 people in the community, you will unearth those issues. Whoops. So so many important reasons to have a feasibility study and not skip it, which I know somebody at your organization is saying, let's skip it. Here are the reasons that you can say, you know what, we should not skip it. It's a critical part of responsible campaign planning and strategy to ensure that we're successful. You want to add anything before we move on?
Nope, I think that's good.
Excellent. Okay, I do see some questions coming in, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. So
And be sure to put your questions in the Q&A and not the chat. It's hard for us to follow both. So if you've written a question in the chat, copy it and put it in the Q&A, and then we'll be sure to get to it.
Excellent. I'm still going, Andrea?
Yes,
Yeah.
you
I'm
are.
talking. All right. Okay. Traditional feasibility study. So the most common feasibility study out there right now is that you do hire an organization hires an outside consultant with lots of experience doing this. The consultant really takes the lead on developing the feasibility study plan. The consultant anonymously and confidentially interviews your potential donors, and then the consultant presents to the board. This is the traditional model. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of this model, and then we're going to go into why we think there's a better way, actually. But there are pros. There are reasons to do it this way, and there are cons, right? So the consultant-led traditional model is that these consultants, if you hire one, should have a ton of experience. They should be experienced interviewers. They know exactly what questions to ask, how to gather the data. The interviews are confidential. Now, I have this on my pro list because the consultants you're talking to will tell you that this is a reason to have them do it confidentially. Andrea and I are not convinced that this is actually a pro. We'll get to that. It is less time intensive for staff because you're outsourcing these interviews. Now, again, not sure if this is really a pro. I'm kind of doing these pros from the consultant's perspective, right? It is less time for staff, but I'm not sure. If I'm a staff member preparing for a campaign, I can't think of a better use of your time, my time, than talking to my biggest and best donors, but we'll get to that. It does build the board confidence. So if you bring in an outside consultant, an outside expert, no doubt the board will sit up and listen. Now, the cons. It's an opaque process, right? You're handing off your biggest and best donors. You're saying come back with an analysis. You're not involved that much. So that's a problem. It also draws criticism, these interviews, from your biggest donors with no recourse, right? So if you hire a consultant to have these interviews and they say to your donors, what are the issues? What are your concerns? They give you that in aggregate. They don't tell you who said what necessarily. And so you can't go back to any specific donor and say, hey, I hear you're concerned about XYZ. Let's address that. So there's no recourse. And the problem with this style of interview is that it doesn't build donor relationships with the organizational leaders because you're outsourcing these interviews to a consultant. So more cons than pros, but this is the way it's been done. And lots of people are comfortable and used to this process. There's certainly plenty of examples where this is successful, but we think we've found a better way. So Andrea, why don't you talk about how you came up with the better way?
Yes, I will. So I've been in this business a long time. I was a long time in the business as a traditional consultant, doing exactly the kind of feasibility studies that Amy was talking about, where organizations would hire me and I would work with them to put their plan together and to develop a list of people I should interview and develop the case for support, and off I would go and interview people. Now, I was a regional consultant. I worked in a particular region, and many consultants are like that. Solopreneurs, small shops, there are lots of them. And of course, in any region, there are certain numbers of donors who rise to the top, who give the largest gifts to a great many campaigns. And if you're a consultant in that region, you go back and back and back to these people. You get to know them over time, right? That you build a relationship with them over time. And if you're good and the campaigns you work for are successful, they tend to, the donors tend to recommend you. These big donors, the heads of the foundations or wherever, tend to recommend you. So you're sort of in a, in a feedback loop of some sort. And one of the very last traditional feasibility studies I ever did, I remember being in the office of a significant philanthropist in that area whom I had gotten to know well through those years. And we were talking about the organization that I was representing, right? Who was paying me to go and talk to this donor about their campaign. And we were talking about the campaign. And all of a sudden I realized that the conversation was sort of the donors getting my opinion, right? About what I thought about this organization and about its leadership, right? And because we had gotten to know one another, he wanted my opinion. Of course, I shouldn't have been giving my opinion. It wasn't about my opinion. It felt compromised, right? For me, what I thought about the organization didn't much matter. It was up to me to be the face of that organization. But in that moment, I thought to myself, this is wrong. I shouldn't be representing the organization here. This donor should be talking to the head of the organization, not to me, right? There's something wrong with having consultants who are outsiders kind of representing the organization and being able to chit chat and being able to say to the donor, well, what are the things about this organization that you're not so happy with? Why don't you share them with me? So if you really look at how that functions often with consultants, particularly consultants that work in a particular area for year after year and build relationships with the largest donors, there's something, dare I say, corrupt about that system, right? The lines get crossed. I thought to myself, you know what? I don't want to be doing it this way anymore. I need to find a different way. And it took me some time to actually do that. It's not a simple idea to say, all right, instead of the consultant going out and doing these interviews under the guise of confidentiality, right? Then what else do we do? How else do we figure it out? And some years later, when I teamed up with Amy for the Capital Campaign Toolkit, Amy and I together had the opportunity to figure out a better model. And we have figured out a model that we have now tested, and it has exceeded all of my expectations. So we'll tell you about that in a second. But I am super excited and proud to have stuck with this idea long enough to actually have come up with some solutions to a different model. Here's what the model looks like. It's sort of a blended model where you bring the expertise of a consultant into the process, but the actual donor connection and relationship is between the leaders of the organization and the donor. And then the consultant helps make sense of what you found out and helps present the report to the board. Let me start from the beginning there. The consultant who is working with an organization in this new model works with you to make sure that you develop a plan that is clear enough and that makes enough sense and is compelling enough so that you can then take that plan and that dollar goal out to talk to your donors. The consultant helps you figure out who you should be interviewing, helps you develop that list of interviewees, which is all important, right? If you have a feasibility study and you don't get to talk to the largest donors, you're not going to find out what it is you need to find out, right? In fact, as an aside, it's not uncommon for a traditional model consultant to try to get interviews with donors, and the donors actually don't want to speak with the consultant. And then we're seeing that more and more. So the report comes back and the consultant hasn't had a chance to speak to the largest donors. And the report doesn't accurately reflect what's possible. we find that for the most part, donors are more willing to talk to organizational leaders than they are to outside consultants. So the organizational leaders then work with the consultant to get trained and figure out how to do it and figure out what they need to capture and how to go about capturing the information. And there is actually a process for doing that. And the leaders, the organizational leaders, go and conduct the interviews. When the interviews are over, that the material they've collected is collated, and the consultant sits and works with the leaders to prepare a report. I know in the toolkit, when we do that, we have an outline of the report, and we help work on every section, particularly the recommendations, because we know how to slice and dice that material in a way that makes good sense. So together we prepare the report. There's nothing secretive, nothing held back. We all know how we're making these decisions. And finally, the consultant and the organizational leaders co-present the report to the board. So the consultant gives the credibility that a traditional feasibility study brings, but the organizational leaders say, well, this is what we heard. There is no longer sort of a Wizard of Oz behind the screen, right? I always think of traditional studies these days, like the consultants are behind a screen like the Wizard of Oz, because you don't know what really got said in those interviews. In this model, the organizational leaders, of course, know exactly what the donors said. So everybody is working from the same information to come up with recommendations that are quite transparent and clear, and they're recommendations that make sense to everybody. Now, it's been remarkable to do this. We started our first one, how long ago, Amy? When did we do our very first one? 4 years ago?
Yeah.
I did our very first one, right?
Mhm.
I mean, every once in a while, you have to appreciate a client that is willing to be a guinea pig, right?
The first 5 I would call guinea pig. The first 10, maybe.
Someone called up and said, I don't really want consultants to go out talking to my donors. Will you work with me and help me go talk to my donors? I said, well, as a matter of fact, we want to test a new program. Are you willing to be our test? Right. Well, this person did and helped develop the model in the process of doing that. So we have now done, I don't know,
More
what
than
is it?
30.
30
More
of them,
than-
25 to
more than
30 of them.
30.
And not only I've done some of them, but our advisors are doing them. So we now have a really good sampling of organizations and different people who have worked with organizations to do these. And the results are really quite stunning. Do we have a slide about the
Yes,
results? Amy?
the pros and cons and the results. I wanted to pivot to a question or two, and then we'll go to the
Great.
pros and cons and the results.
Let's do it.
So Brooklyn's asking, would you advise against an organization attempting a feasibility study on their own without a consultant? Why or why not? So Brooklyn, here's the challenge. So most organizations, staff and board members do not have experience with multiple feasibility studies. So that means you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what data you're looking for. You don't know how to collect it and analyze it. So I would say that you absolutely need someone who has significant experience in this area, guiding you through the process. Listen, there are plenty of times where an organization says, we're absolutely not going to pay somebody to do a feasibility study to help us. Then we say, okay, go talk to your biggest donors. I would not call it a feasibility study or a formal study. I would call it informal donor conversations. And you can do that, but you're not going to come out of it with real data. You're going to come out with a sense of things, which is better than nothing for sure. So at a minimum, go talk to your donors. But if you want a formal study with real data that you can lean on and know what questions you're supposed to ask and what data you're collecting and looking for and how to analyze it, you need someone with lots of experience to do that. So one more, and then we're going to keep going, and then we'll come back to questions. So do you have one that you want to focus on?
Yes, let's take Ray's question. It was an early question here. Would you say it's best practice to include a dollar amount in the feasibility study? Yes, I would say so. So you want to be testing a plan and a dollar amount, right? You want to be able to say to the donor, we're going to do these three things, these three objectives, and it's going to cost $3.5 million, 10 million, or whatever the number is. And you're going to build a gift range chart for that amount. So you can show that to the people you're talking to and say, these are the gifts we're going to need to bring in if we're going to be successful, right? Do you think that's possible? Where on this, I'm not asking you for a gift, but where on this might you see yourself if this project goes forward? So by all means, you want to be including a specific dollar amount. You don't want to be saying, well, how much money can we raise? You want to be saying, do you think it's possible for us to raise X number of dollars to do Y? That's what the essence of a study is.
Excellent. All right, let's keep going. We'll come back to questions in a minute. So let's go through the pros and cons of this new study we've just outlined.
Yes. So the most obvious one is that in the new model, it puts the relationship where it should be. It builds the relationship between the organizational leaders and the donors. And that, of course, is what you want to be building. And we found over the years, and it's always so understandable and so curious and so sad, that many organizations are afraid of their largest donors, right? The stakes feel too high. So instead of being more in touch with them as partners, they're less in touch with them. They only go to them when they feel like things are perfect or when they're asking them for money. This feasibility study process gives you a way, an organized way of going and talking to your largest donors without asking them for gifts, but actively asking them for advice in a way that is part of a system that works. And we found that people find that hugely helpful. You have an opportunity to have open conversations, right? Conversations that actually ask their opinions. And they're structured conversations, but they're open conversations. They're not solicitations. They really do invite a back and forth. This model actually trains your organizational leaders. We often work with an executive director and perhaps a board member, maybe one other person doing the interviews. By the time they finish those interviews, they really have gotten good at talking to their largest donors. That's a huge benefit, right? That they go from being anxious to being pros at it. This process is fully transparent. You're not left wondering, well, who said this or who said that, or what did this donor say, or what might that donor do? You know what happened in those conversations, and that gives you something to base your whole forward-moving relationships on. It builds board confidence because it combines the expertise and vision of the staff and key board members with the expertise of someone who really knows what they're doing as a campaign consultant. And this was really interesting and I suppose not surprising, but I hadn't thought about it. It creates a natural path to solicitation. So if an executive director or a board chair has talked to a large donor who has said, I'm not sure what I'll give, but it's likely we'll be a leadership donor when when this project gets going, then guess what? When the project gets going and you go back to the donor and say, I know we had that conversation, we are now going. How does this look to you now? Can we ask you for a leadership level gift? It's just a natural path that's been created instead of going in and not knowing what the donor said to the consultant that then did not get translated to you. That's a remarkable set of positive results from a new model of the study. Now, cons. It is time consuming. It is. Now, honestly, traditional studies are time consuming for staff too, because you have to work on all the pre-stuff, you have to work on scheduling the interviews, you have to be in touch with all of the donors they're talking to. That's also time consuming. But of course, doing the interviews is more time consuming in this model. Leaders, not only may they be anxious, I promise you, you will be anxious. In the beginning of these interviews, it seems that everybody is anxious. And I would just say that anxiety is not all bad, right? That there is something about anxiety that just tells you that it matters. So you work through your anxiety, you build a skill, your anxiety gradually eases. And the biggest question people ask is, and traditional consultants say is, donors won't be as open if the executive director goes in or the board chair goes in, that they won't be as willing to say, well, here's what I don't like about this organization. And that, as far as it goes, is probably true. They're not going to say it, or at least not say it in the same way. But you have to look at that more broadly. That do you really want outside consultants drawing criticism from donors that then you can't do anything about because it's drawn in confidence? Is that really what you want to have happen? Right? That to me is a big negative. I would much rather train you as a leader of your organization to go to a donor and say, there are some things about this organization that may not sit right with you. And I'd love to know what they are. Right? What concerns do you have for me? And what do you think I need to be working on as we build this organization? If you put it that way and give them permission to tell you, they're likely to tell you in a way that you can then continue the conversation. That's a much healthier way to do it than to get strange consultants from the outside to be soliciting those negatives and then not be able to remedy them in any way. So every time I look at this list, Amy, I think about how compelling it is. I'm just convinced myself.
All right, let's go through some lessons learned, and then we have lots of great questions to get to. So I'm just going to stick them up on the
screen here. Lessons learned. We're going to quickly go through these.
Yeah.
So everybody starts out anxious. You want to alternate these with me, Amy?
Yep. Okay. Yes. Everyone's okay. You said it.
Everyone starts out anxious. If you're not anxious, something's wrong.
But after the first 3 interviews, they're not anxious through the whole thing. What we've found is that they only start out that way, and then they get to be pros. Everyone loves the process, right? Donors and leaders. Shockingly, we were sort of surprised. They love the process. We have raving fans and lunatics now. Right. In a positive way. In a positive way.
Donors appreciate talking to organizational leaders. I mean, many donors actually thank the organization for the difference in models. We are on the lookout for donors who say, well, I want to talk to a consultant, right? And we always make that a possibility. We say, if a donor would like to talk to a consultant, we're happy to jump in and have that conversation. You know what? Donors don't really want to talk to consultants. They want to talk to organizational leaders. If they're going to invest in the organization, they want to get to know the leaders of the organization. And this is a great way to do it. And from what we have seen over many of these now, no donors complain about that.
So conversations pave the way to solicitation. There's no better way to tee up your ask. Why would you not want to tee up your ask before you're going to make the biggest ask you've ever made? These are pre-ask conversations built right into the process.
So it's interesting to think what a difference it makes to have a transparent process of figuring out the recommendations, what the recommendations should be. Part of figuring that out is understanding the risk tolerance of the organization. Right? Some organizations have a high risk tolerance, some have a low risk tolerance. When everyone figures out those recommendations together, transparently, and factors those things in, everybody has confidence in what's being recommended, because everybody has put their heads together collectively to figure out what the right recommendations are for that organization.
Yes, and we are delighted to have learned that organizational leaders plan to continue these donor conversations they should have been having all along. But as you know, and we know, nonprofit leaders as a whole are afraid to talk to their biggest donors. So once we have trained them how to do it, they find that they're never going to stop, which is amazing. All right, listen, we're going to dive into questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Bloomerang will send out these slides, so you'll have this. But if you want to take a quick screenshot, how to get our free campaign guide and checklist, or talk to us about your particular campaign or feasibility study, I hope you'll visit capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. So let's dive into some questions. We've got great ones.
Yeah.
Andrea, Gary wants to know, what phase does solicitation volunteer training take place?
Yes. Gary, it's a great question. And it's a question I would have answered differently a while ago. My question the way I answer it now is that volunteers who are going out to solicit gifts should be trained shortly before they go out to solicit gifts. Right? The training doesn't stick very long unless you practice it, unless you use it. So we've worked to develop volunteer training, solicitation training that can be done kind of on the fly, like a few days before someone goes out to solicit a gift, to have a refresher course, to have the model of sort of a big solicitation training and then waiting 6 months or 3 months or 2 months before someone goes out to solicit a gift, I think is a flawed model. So every volunteer or even staff member who's going to go out and solicit gifts, who is not perhaps so expert at it, should be trained shortly before they go and solicit gifts. Sometimes that's in the early stages of the quiet phase of the campaign, right? We train people to do these interviews. They're not solicitation meetings, but we do train them to do them. People can be trained in the public phase of the campaign if they're going to be doing some interviews as well. So throughout the campaign, when people need to be trained is when you should train them.
Yeah. And, you can substitute the word training for role play too. I think that's a good way to think about it. Right before you go out to meet with a donor, you're going to practice, you're going to prepare, You're going to role play. So get rid of the training model and think of it as preparation. All right.
People want to know how much it costs, Amy, how much the feasibility study costs. That's a good question.
Heather's asking how much is the cost. So I want to tell you that I think that that's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, what value are you getting? So I mean, listen,
It's a perfectly good question. If I had a checkbook and was worried about it, I'd ask that question.
So here's what to think about. If your campaign is less than $1 million, a feasibility study might not be cost effective. It might be expensive. If your campaign is over $1 million, most feasibility studies. So, I encourage you to get prices from 3 consultants. I would encourage you to call us at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, and I'm happy to tell you exactly what we charge. But I do want to talk to you about it, and you should call 2 other consultants and find out what they cost. But I want you to think about, what is the value we're getting for the investment that we're making, and how does that compare to how much we will potentially raise?
That was a good answer, Amy.
Thanks. All right. They is asking, how do you find a consultant to conduct a feasibility study? So I'm going to also say, you want to talk to at least 3 consultants to talk about their model, their process, what they recommend, how they work, their price, of course. So one of the 3 on your list, I hope, will be the Capital Campaign Toolkit. So call us as one of your 3. And then for other 2, call other organizations that you know of, either that have similar mission, scope, size, that have done successful campaigns, and find out who they used, or people in your community. In forums, online chats, you'll be able to find successful consultants, but interview 3, talk to 3, at least 3. All right. Oh, Sarah asked about the estimate too. Okay. Gary, at what point do you, as consultants, let the CEO and leadership know the amount that you feel can be raised versus the C? So the starting place is, what is the cost of the project and how much do you want to raise for what you want to accomplish? So the first question is not how much you can raise. That's what you figure out in the feasibility study. The first question, the goal, the working goal, the draft goal that you're testing is how much will our project cost? How much money do we need to raise to do what we want to do? And then we'll worry about whether we can raise more or less, or approximately that amount. I think I answered the question, but I'm not sure.
Yes, let me just say one more thing about that. I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. I'm not very good at that. It's perfectly natural to think that you first need to figure out how much money you can raise before you decide on what the project is. But people don't give you money because you need money. They give you money because you have a vision of what the best thing to do to move your organization into a place of higher impact will be. And you have to develop the project that makes sense for your organization, that is going to enable you to do more in terms of your mission. That's what drives this fundraising. It's not money that drives this fundraising. It's mission and vision that drive the fundraising. So you have to start there. And then you have to develop the project that will move your mission forward and your vision, and put a dollar goal. And then you test that with your donors. It's very hard for people to understand that, to hang on to that. They so badly want to know, well, how much money is in my piggy bank? Then I'm going to figure out when I go to the candy store what kind of candy I can buy. But that's not the way it works in this philanthropic world. It is all about having increased. The reason people can raise so much more money through capital campaigns than through regular annual fundraising is because campaigns fund a springboard of the impact of your organization. Campaigns fund visionary ideas to move your organization forward. And that's where you need to begin, not with how much money you can raise. I don't know how to say that more clearly.
I think that's good. All right, Dan's asking, and then we're going to turn it back over to Anne, I think. Dan's asking, are there options other than face-to-face communications, small nonprofits with donors from Maine to Washington? Dan, what are we doing right now? We've got Zoom, right? I think, if there's any silver lining to the pandemic, it's taught us that we can communicate with people over Zoom. We do our campaign advising nationally and internationally, and we are rarely, if ever, in anybody's living room or conference room. We really are virtual for 99.9% of the work we do. And our situation, it's not because of the pandemic. It's because it's effective and efficient and affordable. And it sounds like if you have donors from Maine to Washington, it's going to be effective and affordable and efficient for you as well to meet and talk with your donors, primarily using the technology that we have.
So,
all right,
Gary
Anne.
has asked about credibility, and just one more thing that that's why we find this blended model works so well, that it combines the ability of the organization to really be in touch with the donors with the credibility of experts by your side. And that's exactly what we're looking to do, is to marry those two in this process. All right, Anne.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. This was absolutely fantastic, Amy and Andrea. I relate it to things that I've done in the past with buyer journey conversations and just getting close to your donor and connecting and really hearing in their own words what moves them and what's powerful. So thank you so much for your time. We're going to push out a poll to everybody. If you would like to know more, you can raise your hand. Know more, connect with Amy and Andrea, or learn more about Bloomerang and how we can help you connect and stay engaged with your donors as well. Let us know. And then what I want to we do these webinars every Thursday with the exception of Thanksgiving and around the holidays, but so about 50 times a year we get the community together to raise each other up, to share best practice and ideas. So mark your calendars for next week. I'm just going to talk through this. We are going to be talking about how to plan 3 months of nonprofit content in one day. So mark your calendars for that for next week. So that should be a good one as well. But again, let us know if you want to connect with Amy and Andrea. We'll share this with them. And we are again, this was fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today. And everybody is just saying this is so helpful. So thank you. I couldn't agree more. And to all of you out there, in Zoom land. Hope that the rest of your day goes really well, and that things are productive as we get close to the giving season. I hope that it is really successful for you and your ask and your communications. So with that, stay safe and have a fabulous day. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ann. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all
Bye-bye.
your great questions. Bye, Amy.
Bye.